Okay, so I just talked about the three different kinds of evidence that are used, that Ortner urges us to use to articulate specifically how can we show that women are considered subordinate to men. So is it located in the realm of kinship, family, or ideology, or status, or the actual roles that women are allowed or not allowed to play, or women as religious symbols, or the limits to the power of these religious symbols, right? Um, so once again, to return to this question of nature and culture and man and woman, because this is the heart of Ortner's argument, right? She's arguing that women are associated with nature primarily because of their reproductive roles, their physiology. And by contrast, men become associated with culture, that which exists outside of the household, which is in the public realm. And that provides men with, historically and now, with once again, power in this kind of broader relational sense outside of one's immediate nuclear or whatever kind of families we're talking about. Of course, we should say the very idea of nature and natural is itself cultural, right? To determine this difference that some things are natural and some things are cultural, that is a cultural practice that we articulate through language, which is cultural. Okay, I know that may be a bit confusing. We can talk about it Thursday. All right, so Ortner says, or I should say, Ortner focuses on the body and biological processes of women. She says, look, like women's bodies as reproductive vessels, which is how the role that they are asked to take on to reproduce the human species, or required to take on, compelled to take on, makes them more closely associated with nature than men, right? Women bear a much, much, much higher burden than men when it comes to the reproduction of the human species, right? Think of all of the bodily restrictions, pains, etc., that women must bear, and how those differ for men in terms of reproduction. So one example, let's take menstruation, painfully physical, emotionally difficult. It physically marks women to their reproductive role, right? Or as a reminder or symbolic attachment to their role as reproducers. As we mentioned before, menstruation is that which defiles. And Mary Douglas writes about this in terms of purity and pollution. Ortner says, look at all these societies in which menstruation is considered polluting, and women who menstruate are not allowed, who are menstruating are not allowed to participate, say, in a particular ritual or something. Right? So because of their very physicality, the physiological features they experience, women are relegated to, or stigmatized, relegated to the domestic realm. Look at pregnancy, right? The later stages of pregnancy physically make women less mobile, right? They have to stay within a particular range. So men could go off and hunt and move and do whatever. Meanwhile, pregnancy drains energy and vitamins from a woman's body into that of the fetus, right? And so here I have two images here of Simone de Beauvoir, a famous French philosopher. Ortner agrees and draws upon de Beauvoir and says, look, it's women's physiology that's often linked us closer to nature, right? It's all these various processes that make women have not only a higher burden to bear in terms of the labor of reproduction, but also they're symbolically associated with natural processes more than men are, even if men are participating in processes that are just as natural. It's the way we think about them. So women's body is reproductive in this sense to human life, whereas man's body is seen to be reproductive to culture. And this is the distinction. Ortner's talking not only that, like, she's not saying, and this is a common mistake that students make, she's not saying that women are more natural than men. She's saying that cultures across the globe associate the thing of nature, natural processes with women more than they associate them with men. So one thing Ortner argues is that women are, of course, socialized into their own cultures, and being a product of their culture, many women buy into their own subordination. I think it's a very interesting, compelling argument, and it also shows how Ortner's again pushing for or arguing, hey, look, listen, this is why the feminist movement matters, right? It is a consciousness raising project, just like other activist projects are. They're trying for us to realign our consciousness and to be aware of the kinds of discrimination that are happening all around us. Ortner also makes this argument about the domestic or private versus public sphere. It's that women are relegated to the domestic or private because they're physically less mobile. Pregnancy and child rearing mean that they are, as I already mentioned, less mobile, less able to go off somewhere for long periods of time. They obviously, when one's caring for an infant, one has to stay close to that child, be watching them at all times. Lactation is an important element here as well, right? Sorry, that's the next one. Lactation is important because the child therefore has to be physically close. Again, if we're talking about hominids or hunter-gatherer societies like that, there is no baby food, right? That's it. So it was important for mothers to be close to the children at all times and to be around the home because they're also cooking, right? All these various responsibilities that women are, one could argue, plagued with, one could argue some embrace them, is a function of their physiology. I thought Ortner made an interesting argument about careers, which is perhaps somewhat less true, absolutely less true today than it was in the 1970s. But like even you think about food preparation, we think about that cooking is associated with women. And so you do have many women cooks, but haute cuisine, like the most famous and powerful chefs, are almost always men. She talks about this in terms of teaching as well. I remember she says, most professors are men, but most elementary teachers are women. Again, these things are changing, but I think the general pattern remains. So just going over my other notes here, seeing if I missed anything. So another thing that lactation does is it puts this idea into the head of those who are in a culture that women are natural child bearers, right? Via their obligation to feed, to breastfeed. It's normal that they should do childcare. Of course it isn't, right? Of course men can physically raise children too and watch them. There is overall this cross-cultural tendency to think that women are the natural child rearers. And in all of this, the private sphere, the domestic sphere is devalued. In other words, it's understood or believed in the popular imaginary that the public sphere, that which exists outside the home, hunting, these are more valuable pursuits, right? These are all things that, of course, feminists are trying to push back against, including feminist anthropologists. Again, interesting to think that in many societies, men do engage in child rearing, but not to the same extent that women are expected to. So there's a part where she talks about Nancy Chodorow and psychoanalysis or psychology. That's probably, I'm sure most of you are getting confused at that part. Don't worry. We can talk about this more on Thursday. She's drawing from this psychoanalyst, Nancy Chodorow, who basically argues not that men and women have different brain structures and think differently, but that through women's roles as child bearers and child rearers, they come to develop different attachments or relationships or psychological or psychoanalytic capabilities than men. Basically, they're more relational, they're more better at cooperating, etc. Anyway, we don't have to delve into that too much for this course, but if you have questions, feel free to ask. All right. So Ortner goes on to basically say then that men are associated with this thing called culture, capital C, meaning that which exists, again, in the public sphere, things like politics or the arts, right? Think when we say cultured, right? Something that is, of a higher class. This means then that men are associated with powerful arenas, right? And of course, feminists don't think this is good. They're just explaining this is how we came to this place where men are given privileges over women. And then, and this brings us back to the women the gatherer argument, Ortner says, well, but again, it's mothers that are socializing children, that are teaching them language. And so in fact, it's women who have these incredible social and communication skills, but also it's women who are keeping culture alive, in a sense, who are transmitting culture to the next generation, to children, to babies. And that should be a very compelling reason for us to think differently about women's role in culture and society. All right, that concludes our lecture, and I will see you all on Thursday.